So this is the first batch of Teslas to hit the UK, and you're expecting to sell 35,000 of them this year. 11 years ago, the company didn't exist. What were you thinking when you founded it?
Well, when we created Tesla, we wanted to show that you could make a really compelling electric car, that you could make an electric car that was really better than a petrol car. And I think with the Model S, we've been able to achieve that. It's been rated by some of those critical reviewers in the world as being among the best, and by some the best car in the world.
And what's been the biggest challenge over those 11 years, making this a thing?
Over 11 years, wow, okay, that's a lot of challenges. I mean, the biggest challenge that Tesla faced was not going bankrupt in 2008, with the global financial crisis. General Motors and Chrysler went bankrupt, and we narrowly avoided bankruptcy thanks to a dedicated group of employees and investors. That was probably our most difficult moment. In the creation of this car in particular, I suppose the most challenging thing was to create a super safe car that had great performance and yet had great range as well. So the car's got a 265-mile range, despite being a luxury sedan with a tremendous amount of capability.
Okay. And on that safety point, as soon as there's a small incident last year, I think, with Tesla, the press jumped on it. Do you think the reporting around it is fair? Do you feel like as soon as there's
Well, I think Tesla gets a lot of attention, positive and negative. And I guess it's a bit of live by the sword, die by the sword, that everything we do seems to be amplified. And there was the whole sort of fire thing, which, even though the Model S has an incidence of fire which is 5 times less than the automotive industry. In fact, it might have, I think it's maybe the least fire-prone car on the market. Last year, it got more press than the other 500,000 gasoline car fires combined. Yeah. And even though we've never had an injury, I mean, touch wood, we've never had a serious permanent injury in any of our cars ever. So nobody's died, nobody's had a permanent injury in any of our cars ever. I think there may be still some perception that our car is somehow not safe, even though it's actually the safest car on the road.
And is that coming from the manufacturers? Do you feel like you're up against these big established incumbents and they're sort of scared, they're taking swipes at you?
Some of them do take swipes, yeah. And I suppose that's natural for competitors. Yeah, but I think the truth wins out in the end, particularly these days with the internet. People are able to search and compare, and with 5 minutes of research, you can get to the truth very quickly.
Yeah. You're very quick to come back online as well, occasionally when it's...
Yeah.
Are you monitoring? Are you quite thin-skinned about this stuff?
Well, I mean, I really care about Tesla and about the Model S and everything, so it's hard to be dispassionate about that. It's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears from a lot of people. And I mean, particularly if the criticism isn't accurate, it's sort of like the Model S it's like your child. It's like let's say your child goes into a competition and loses, but not on the merits. Yeah. Then you'd be pretty angry about that, or if somebody disparages your child in a way that's false. I mean, there are honest criticisms to be had, certainly, but it's difficult to take false criticism of something you care about.
Yeah. And so it's taken a new company against the incumbents. It's also in terms of green thinking, we had a lot of talk in the UK about green thinking. It's kind of slipped off the agenda. Why has it taken a private company to bring it back to the agenda? And is the government really thinking about this enough? Have you found out that you're kind of fighting against this?
Well, I mean, governments around the world certainly make a lot of noise about caring about the environment, but the results are not very good. Yeah. particularly in automotive, that there's much less than 1% of new cars made every year are electric. So this year there'll be 90-something million cars made a year. So rounded off, say 100 million new cars made a year. There's about 2 billion 2 billion cars in the global fleet. Even if all cars went to all new cars produced were electric this year, it would take 20 years to replace the global fleet. And much less than 1% of new cars made this year are electric. So clearly, we need stronger action.
Yeah.
Options and things.
You can go
maybe
up,
not our best example.
So an affordable £50,000, but that's out of the reach of most people. It's great, it's lovely to talk about the environment and saving it. Is it just a plaything for the rich, though, at this point?
Well, the goal of Tesla is to create mass-market electric cars, but we can only get there one step at a time. And we started off with the Roadster, our sports car, which was even more expensive and in very low volume. Now we're in step 2, which is, we would argue, is sort of a mid-price, mid-volume car. But we need to sell this car in order to make the money for the high-volume, affordable car in the future. We can't think of any other way to get there.
When will we get that high-volume, affordable car, do you think?
It's about 3 years.
3 years away, and then we'll be driving around. Okay, that's great. But then beyond that, is necessarily car the best paradigm for the future transportation system? So you've suggested yourself the Hyperloop, we've seen the Google driverless cars, different forms of public transport. Is the car sort of an old metaphor? Why do that rather than think of something completely new?
Well, people like cars, clearly. That's their chosen method of getting around. Yeah. And, so we have to adapt to what people want to do. That's not to the exclusion of something like the Hyperloop or mass transit, but it's complementary, certainly. And so we've got to make electric cars. I think it's yeah.
Fair enough. Around the time you founded Tesla, you also same sort of time founded SpaceX, another company.
SpaceX was about a year earlier, but yeah.
Okay, so that was a busy year for you. Can you take us through that? I mean, in 1 year to found Tesla and then SpaceX. What was your idea with SpaceX?
Well, with SpaceX, the goal is to accelerate the development of rocket technology. So if you think about the fact that humanity was able to go to the moon in 1969 and now can sort of barely get to low Earth orbit, that's not even, that's a huge decline in capability. And what we'd like to do with SpaceX is try to turn that around and rapidly improve rocket technology to the point where maybe ultimately we could have a city on Mars and be a multi-planet species. I'm not saying SpaceX is going to do all that, but we are going to try to advance rocket technology as much as we can in that direction.
And where are you now with it? What's the latest on that?
Well, right now we're launching quite a lot of satellites into orbit for various commercial customers. NASA's our single biggest customer. They're about a quarter of our launches. And we've done missions to and from the space station with cargo, including live cargo in some cases. So our next mission to the space station will include 40 mice, so the astronauts. So it has the ability it maintains a life support system and everything. We'll be launching astronauts in about 2 years, and keep going on from there.
Like you say, it's 60 years since the moon. How disappointing is it that governments, private industry has to step in here? Why are governments backed away, and is it a pity that they've backed away?
Yeah, I think what we're doing at SpaceX is certainly in collaboration with NASA. NASA's been a big supporter, and I'm not sure we could have really gotten where we are today without NASA. But in general, commercial technology companies are better at advancing technology than governments, particularly once it gets out of the sort of fundamental research phase. That's sort of what SpaceX hopes to be, is sort of to really drive the technology development a lot faster than would occur otherwise if it was just sort of a big government endeavor. Yeah.
And are you going to go for an asteroid first or Mars first? What's the after the moon and all that?
Asteroid first to Mars. Well, there's not many asteroids between here and Mars that are any, of any size.
Okay. So Mars is the closest destination to do that first.
After the moon, you're either going to go to a very small asteroid or Mars. The big asteroids are between Mars and Jupiter.
That's great. So you've got your eye on them already. Is there a rough date for the Mars landing in your mind?
But 11 or 12 years.
11 or 12 years. Cool. That's great. But at the same time, you say private companies can step in and do this. Is there danger with the privatization of space? So people have called it the Wild West. The Wild West was famously the most ruthless example of capitalism ever. It was very hard, and a lot of people made money. Right. Is the same thing going to happen? Is this going to benefit all of us, or just the very rich who get there first?
Do you mean Mars?
Yeah, space in general. Not just SpaceX, but the whole privatization.
Well, I think in order to create a self-sustaining city on Mars, you've got to make it as affordable as possible to go there. Otherwise, you won't get enough people.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to get the cost of moving to Mars roughly equivalent to a middle-class home, and then there'll be enough people who wanted to sell their house on Earth and move to Mars. Yeah. I think that's sort of the key threshold for it to become a self-sustaining colony, if you will. Kind of like the English colonies in the Americas, which started out with a lot of sort of basically rich people and the British government sponsoring people to go over, but eventually, anyone could go over.
So it's the same sort of thing as, in the UK, Richard Branson with Virgin Galactic. Do you sort of see that as you're doing a similar thing there?
No, we're pretty different from Virgin Galactic. Virgin Galactic is sort of more oriented towards entertainment, and having a sort of a quick, fun ride.
So not as serious as SpaceX?
Yeah, it's right. I mean, SpaceX is sort of more Martian colonization. Whereas Virgin Galactic, at least in its initial efforts, is sort of trying to give you kind of 5 minutes of weightlessness. It's different thing.
Different thing. Great. And last question. This happens a lot, I'm sure, but there's always the Tony Stark comparison that's made, and Jon Favreau has said you're an inspiration for that. And I read that you sort of read comics growing up in South Africa. Do you ever see yourself as a bit of a superhero? Is that what you think?
Not really. No. No, I mean, I think of myself as sort of as an engineer, really. Try to create new technology that's important but fun and cool at the same time.
That's a very Tony Stark answer. Elon Musk, thank you very much. That's
all right,
great.
Thanks.
Cheers.